The Doctor's age is a conundrum. No, not a Saranga conundrum, don't worry. But it's a question which I've delved deep into my last video, predicting the age of the 13th Doctor. So please check that out before you continue watching this video, because no doubt you're going to be reminded of it 101 times before the end. That video will basically give you an idea on how old each Doctor is in respective to each other, applying the theories that I did. It will make this video seem a lot easier to understand, because today I'm going to be taking all of them numbers and figures and putting them into a ranking of which Doctors lived the longest. So let's run through this in chronological order before assembling our ranking at the end. So, the first Doctor. We don't have an exact age on how old the first Doctor was when he regenerated in the 10th planet, but according to the second Doctor, relatively early on in his era, he said he was 450 years old. This gives us a rough idea that the first Doctor lived for up to around 400 and 450 years. We also learnt that he stole the TARDIS when he was 236, which gave him a lovely 200 years at least of travelling in the TARDIS, which is just lovely. What isn't lovely, however, is what happens after that, because following that reference from the second Doctor, we have absolutely nothing to go off until the fourth Doctor's era. There is a huge grey area without any real concrete numbers on how long the second and third Doctors lived. We know that the second Doctor started at around 450 and that the fourth Doctor started at around 750. Which gives us roughly a 300-year time gap which the second and third Doctors lived in. But which Doctor lived longer? Did they both live equally, the same amount of time, or did one Doctor live a lot longer than the other? How do we possibly split up this gap? Well, it's very much down to your own theories and ideas. Some accounts claim that the second Doctor was only 500 years old when he regenerated, meaning he had a lifespan of only 50 years. This would then leave the third Doctor to have lived out the other 250. But I'm not going to run with that theory. I'd like to continue with the theory that I mentioned in my last video, which was the Series 6B theory. This suggested that the second Doctor worked for the Time Lords as part of his punishment between the War Games and Spearhead from Space, which is also explored in various other comics and could prove as to why the Doctor looks significantly older in multi-Doctor stories like the Two Doctors. As these stories can't be placed in the second Doctor's timeline, we're going to assume that he lived a lot longer on from the War Games than what we originally thought. This also makes sense with the third Doctor's era and the lack of any sort of aging whatsoever. This paired with the fact that, of course, parts of his era were spent earthbound before finally being allowed to travel later on, this means that the third Doctor aged in sync and parallel to a lot of his earthly human companions. So you've got to tip the balance towards the second Doctor living a lot longer than the third. So this is me just throwing a random number into the mix, but I'm predicting that the second Doctor lived from somewhere between 450 years old and 700 years old, giving him a lifespan of up to 250 years, with the third Doctor living out the remainder of around 50 years. This then brings us back to the fourth Doctor's era, where, as I said, he always said he was around 750 years old, give or take. But unfortunately, we don't get an exact concrete number on how old the fifth Doctor was in his entire era. So it's impossible to predict how long the fourth Doctor lived. So, like in my previous video, I'm going to go off the only account which I could find, which suggested that when the fourth Doctor regenerated into the fifth, he was 813 years old. With this being the only numbers we could really find, we're going to stick with it, and this means that the longest running Doctor of the classic series lived for only 63 years. Thankfully, using these numbers, with the knowledge that the sixth Doctor often referred to himself being around 900 years old, this means that the fifth Doctor lived for roughly 87 years. Then, in Time and the Rani, the seventh Doctor told Mel that he was exactly 953 years old. This means that the sixth Doctor lived for around 53 years in total. In the TV movie, we then see that the 7th Doctor had aged and eventually regenerated into the 8th Doctor. It's believed by many accounts that he was around 1,000 years old at the time, with one account being as precise as 1009. So, using this exact number, we're going to guess that the 7th Doctor lived for approximately 56 years. As for the 8th Doctor, well, this is just as tough as it was predicting the 2nd and 3rd Doctor's lifespans. Again, it's down to your own theories and interpretations. His age changes regularly depending on the audio you listen to or the book that you read. But basing it on my theory, what I mentioned again in my latest video, watch it if you haven't already, the 8th Doctor regenerated somewhere between the ages of 1,600 and 1,700 years old. This means that the 8th Doctor was alive for somewhere between 600 and 700 years. Not bad for a Doctor who we only seen on TV twice. The big question is the War Doctor's lifespan, because asking this is like turning to your friend and asking him how long is a piece of string. I guess it's as long as the Time War, which is pretty impossible to predict. It was a war which spread across all of time and space and cannot be placed in between one bracket and another. But the War Doctor does give us a fighting chance, because he says in The Day of the Doctor that he was 400 years younger than the 11th, who at that time said he was 1200 and something. This would mean that the War Doctor is claiming that he was around 800 to 900 years old. Now this, of course, can't be right, because the 6th and 7th Doctors claim to be older than that, and this would in turn make the War Doctor only a mere 100 to 200 years older than the 4th Doctor. It doesn't make any sense. So again, applying my theory which I explained in my last video, the War Doctor basically started his age from scratch, with him becoming the warrior and basically ditching his old life as the Doctor. So assuming that the War Doctor's life started from 0 in the Night of the Doctor, we are going to guess that the War Doctor's lifespan lasted somewhere between 800 and 900 years. In the modern series, we then get a bit of consistency once again with the numbers, as they pretty much run in line with the show year on year up until Series 6, with the lifespans of the 9th and 10th Doctors being quite surprising. The 9th Doctor claims in Series 1 that he was 900 years old, with the 10th Doctor then saying he was 903 in The Voyage of the Dam, which was pretty much set 3 years later. So if we're basing the Doctor's lifespans off the actual years which they were shown on screen, then this means that the 9th Doctor was indeed the Doctor for just as short of a period of time in the show itself as to what he was in real life. He was clearly quite new to his body in Rose, and he regenerated in the following finale, which seemingly was in the same year. This gives the 9th Doctor a total lifespan of one single solitary year. Continuing with the same theory, in the 10th Doctor's final story, he claimed that he was 906. So assuming he regenerated at around the age of 901 at the very latest, this means that the 10th Doctor didn't have a great lifespan either. He lived for a maximum of around 5 years. No wonder he didn't want to go. The 11th Doctor's era started quite steadily too. In the middle of Series 5, he'd only aged by 1 year to 907, before claiming he was 909 at the start of Series 6. Again, this is pretty straightforward. However, following his farewell tour in The Wedding of River Song, by the end of Series 6, the Doctor was 1,103 years old, before then rounding that up to 1,200 years old in Series 7 and in the 50th anniversary. This means that between the 11th hour and the Day of the Doctor, the 11th Doctor had lived for a pretty juicy 300 years. That's already hundreds and hundreds of years more than the previous two put together, but the 11th Doctor was only getting started. He then stayed on Trenzalore in his quote-unquote final life to protect the town called Christmas, and according to the Tales of Trenzalore, he stayed there for a huge 900 years. This means that the 11th Doctor spent just as much time on Trenzalore as he did in pretty much the entirety of the classic era, barring the odd decade. This gives the 11th Doctor a total lifespan of 1,200 years. And finally, onto the 12th Doctor, and from what we know, he started his 14th incarnation at around the age of 2,100. We do know that he spent 24 years with River on Beryllium and a further 70 working at Bill's University. We don't hear of any other major time jumps in his era, so I predict that the 12th Doctor lived for a minimum of 94 years, maybe pushing it up towards 100. This then makes our ranking really interesting and quite eye-opening as well, because at the bottom we have the 9th Doctor, who lived for only around a single year, followed by the 10th Doctor, who didn't really do much better, living a maximum of 5 years. The 3rd Doctor then lived 10 times longer at around 50 years, although this is incredibly speculative, with the 6th Doctor not doing much better, living around 53 years. The 7th Doctor just about beat that with a lifespan of 56 years, with the 4th Doctor not being too far ahead of him, living around 63 years. The 5th Doctor lived for a little bit longer than that, with around 87 years, followed by the 12th Doctor, who lived between 94 and 100 years. We then get a big jump, with the 2nd Doctor living for around 250 years, again very speculative, followed by the 1st Doctor, who lived up to a much more accurate figure of around 450 years. We then have the 8th Doctor, who we believe to have lived between 600 and 700 years, with the War Doctor then living between a predicted 800 and 900 years. They are all absolutely dwarfed though by the 11th Doctor, who lived by far the longest. He lived for a huge 1,200 years. We often judge doctors by how long they were in the role, but if you try and crunch these numbers, it's crazy how much longer some doctors actually lived than others. Based off of my personal theories, the 1st Doctor was in fact alive for longer than the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th Doctors combined. The 8th Doctor and War Doctor's total lifespan throughout the entire Time War adds up to being around a third of the Doctor's entire life, and that huge section of the Doctor's life only just beats the 11th Doctor's entire tenure by a couple of percent, with the 11th Doctor coming in at a huge 31.5% of his entire lifetime. What is even crazier is two of the most popular Doctors who helped bring the show back to success in the modern series, being the 9th and 10th Doctors. Together, they only totalled up a tiny, minuscule 0.1% of the Doctor's life, which is mad when you consider all the amazing things they crammed into what overall looks like nothing more than a pit stop in the Doctor's overall life. Of course, these numbers are based on my own theories, and chances are you'll calculate completely different ones, but this was just so eye-opening to me to see how different periods of the Doctor's life changed. The start of the classic era seemed like quite a big part of his life before the second half of the classics flying by in a flash. The Time War then lasted for quite a long time before the start of the modern series going by in the blink of an eye. The 11th Doctor then got greedy and lasted for a ridiculously long amount of time, with the 12th Doctor then reverting back to a decent innings. How long will the 13th Doctor live? We do not know. And if you then add the Timeless Child onto this, that period of the Doctor's life probably dwarfs the one that we've spoke about in the entirety of this video. But that's just my theories. I would love to hear yours. Firstly, how old do you think the 13th Doctor currently is? And in your mind, how does that break up each of the Doctor's lifetimes individually? I would love to hear your thoughts and theories in the comments section below, and as always, if there's anything that I may have missed or gotten wrong, let me know in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this video, of course, do give it a like and subscribe to this channel for much more cool Doctor Who videos to come. Don't forget to hit the bell to be notified so you do not miss a single upload, and of course, if you want to check out us reviewing various other Doctor Who medias, go to thewhoaddicts.com, which is our website where we have some great writers who bring out weekly content on the likes of Big Finish, books, comics, and much, much more. There you can find links to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to keep tabs on us across all social media. And of course, if you want to donate to the channel, you can do by visiting our Patreon. If you do so, you receive free Who Addicts merchandise. But until next time, guys, that has been 2 videos of me crunching numbers to death. I think it's time for me to have a lie down. So until next time, thank you for watching. Oh, I'll see you in the next one.